felt like everything that ever existed surrounded me. I can't explain that, but it was this vastness, this richness to this darkness. And so I was curious. And about then, I started to see this light, and we've all heard about the light. But I saw it, and so I was drawn to it. And it felt like I was moving toward it or it was coming toward me. I'm really not sure. But as I got closer, I saw that the light was not just one light, but it was millions upon millions of fragments of light all together. And they were moving, and it was as if they had one mind. They were all kind of moving this way and that way. And it was absolutely beautiful.
My guest today is Dave Bennet, who had an NDE when he died in the ocean. But maybe even more fascinating to me is the life review that he had during his NDE and the intuitive abilities that are awakened in him after. So I'm so excited to talk to you, Dave, today. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Lori, thank you for having me. This is great.
Well, why don't we start with, I know that you were only in your 20s when this happened, but who was Dave
Yeah.
before you had your NDE? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was I was the adrenaline junkie diver Dave. I was a I was the chief engineer of a research vessel, but also I was a commercial diver. So adrenaline was my juice, you know. Um, but the prior to that, my kind of like the way I grew up and everything, I grew up with a single mom when it wasn't cool to be a single mom, and so she used to try to place me herself in families, and most of the time it didn't work out very well because the families didn't really care, you know. And so I had this attitude that nobody really cared about me and that I had to take care of myself. So I was a really self-sufficient and self-involved type of individual. I really, like I said, I was an adrenaline junkie, but my philosophy was you cut your swath through life. And that's
Mhm.
pretty brutal philosophy when you think about it, because it means that you're just looking out for number one. You don't care about other people. You really just you have a goal and you're going to go for it. And you're going to whatever gets in your way, you're just going to cut your way through it. So yeah, I was not really the nicest person before. Like I said, I was very self-involved.
Okay. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about the NDE in any way that you would like?
Okay, sure. Well, in 1983, I was the chief engineer of a research vessel. We did underwater exploration, and it was my dream job. I mean, I actually got to where I wanted to be, and and we were just finishing up a job where we were evaluating an ROV, a remote operated submarine. And a storm was coming in, and we were trying to get into the harbor before the storm did, but we didn't. We didn't get there in time. The harbor master refused our ship entry. So, but we had a whole contingent of people on board that were part of the evaluation of this submarine, and one of the design engineers needed to get to LAX. So, and this is on the California coast. We're up north, and the but the harbor master wouldn't let the ship in, so the captain decided that we'd lower one of our rubber zodiacs. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's you see the Marines and stuff use it for landings and stuff like that, and we've used it to retrieve our submarines for years. So we put that in the water. The captain decided that I should go because we didn't have our normal crew on board, so there weren't any mates that really knew the harbor that well. But as chief engineer, I was third officer. I knew the harbor well, and so he asked me to go along just to make sure and navigate, get them in, get them, and come bring the boat back. And so we had a mate that was, driving, and I was in the bow, kind of navigating, and we headed off, and you could kind of see the shoreline. We're about 2 miles offshore, and you could see the coastline because it was kind of lit up. But this is a stormy night, all right, and the waves were just we were out 2 miles out, and they were just these big rolling, you know, waves. And so we'd go on the top of a swell. We'd take kind of a bearing on the harbor buoy. We'd roll down the swath, the trough, and get up onto the next one and do it all over again. But it wasn't long. We lost track of where the harbor buoy was, and we didn't realize the storm had blown us a mile south of the harbor. And so we just decided to do a beach landing. We'll get this guy in, get him to LAX somehow, some way, and taking care of business basically. And we got about a mile offshore, and we ran into a breaker zone. And if you've seen these movies where you have these big, big waves that kind of, curling, like you would see in a surfing competition, that sort of thing. We drove right off one. And and when we landed, I yelled to the mate to turn us about and take us back out to sea, because we were in a dangerous position right there with to have a small craft and right in the middle of a breaker zone. So just as he turned it around and we were starting to head back out, another one came up, and it came right down on top of us, and it folded that Zodiac in half like a peanut butter sandwich. And I was in the bow, so it catapulted me into the ocean. Well, I'm an experienced diver. I've been trained, so being in the water, other than the cold shock, the water was freezing cold. Other than that, I was like, okay, this night we had actually gone down to the bosun's locker and we had put on some life vests. And it was one of the few times that we actually wore life vests. But we knew we were going into some heavy seas, so we thought we'd be good. But these guys were old, and in fact we had to beat the dirt off them when we pulled them out of the bosun locker. So I'm hanging on to this life vest. I'm thinking, no, and it's an old-fashioned World War II Mae West type, life vest. One of those big puffy orange, looks like a giant orange pillow. And so I'm hanging on to that, thinking, well, she's going to bring me up. And I'm waiting and I'm waiting. But meanwhile, I'm being tumbled and tossed like a rag doll. You wouldn't believe it was the most violence I think I've ever experienced in my entire life, just being tumbled and tossed. So I didn't know which way was up. I didn't know which way was down. All I knew was I was just being trashed out there in the middle, with these waves. So eventually, you can only hold your breath so long. And when the oxygen in your lungs gets depleted, and you're not supplying fresh air, you start to experience oxygen deprivation, where, everything is just fine, And so eventually I breathed in salt water and I drowned. It's not a terrible way to go, Lori. It's because there's an initial burning, but then boom, I was in this absolute darkness. And I was like, what's going on? It's quiet. It's peaceful. There's no more roaring sea. If you've ever heard a sea in that state, it's incredibly loud. The water was cold. I'm not cold anymore. And I'm just curious, because in commercial diver training, we go through, we push it. We push the envelope so that we know what oxygen deprivation feels like. We know what, this is way beyond anything in my training. And I'm like, I'm just suspended in this absolute darkness. And I'm like, but it didn't feel like I was alone. It felt like, yes, it appeared that I was in absolute isolation or solitude, but it felt like everything that ever existed surrounded me. I can't explain that, but it was this vastness, this richness to this darkness. And so I was curious. And about then I started to see this light, and we've all heard about the light, but I saw it, and I was just drawn to it because it was the only feature. So I was drawn to it, and it felt like I was moving toward it, or it was coming toward me. I'm really not sure. But as I got closer, I saw that the light was not just one light, but it was millions upon millions of fragments of light all together, and they were moving, and it was as if they had one mind. They were all kind of moving this way and that way, and it was absolutely beautiful. And I have to honestly say, I was in gaga awe of what I was experiencing. And I tried to look at myself. I actually tried to look at myself. And I realized I was becoming one of those fragments of light. And and as I got closer, three fragments broke away to greet me. And as they were greeting me, I was like, there were these waves of love. It felt like somebody had just wrapped a warm blanket of love around me. And I was in this embrace. And as they came closer, they were welcoming me home. And this is always hard. This part's always hard for me because it felt more like home than anything I had ever experienced here on life. Like I said, I used to be this brash guy that, you know, didn't feel like anybody was looking out for me. So I didn't really have an experience of what was home and or family. And these felt more like family than anything I'd ever experienced. And eventually there were a dozen that greeted me. And I call them my soul family. And my soul family indicated that we needed to go into the light even deeper. And we went to this area that felt to me like a giant bubble or a sphere. And we went inside. And once we got inside, I started to re experience my life. Now, you hear a lot of people talk about the life review. Well, for me, it was as if I was reliving my life. But it was also like my consciousness had fragmented into these multiple streams of consciousness so that I could re-experience my life, not only from my my perspective, but also from everyone that I've ever experienced with, from their perspective. So I got to feel every time I was that brash young man, I got to feel how they felt about it. So I got to see kind of the good, the bad, the ugly of Dave's life. And not only was I experiencing it like this, but my soul family were in there experiencing it with me. Well, ooh, that's incredibly humbling. Um, I was, there were parts of my life that I felt kind of ashamed that they had to experience, those types of events. And, but they didn't, they weren't judging me. They weren't judging me at all. They were just supporting me. And if anything, they were just loving me. And so we went through this. We started experiencing, my life. And we finally reached a point where I, I didn't have a reference. It was beyond where I had just drowned. And so I was a little disoriented, but they just supported me. They loved me. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was looking into my potential future. But it was totally different than the life review before. It was like I was looking down this corridor or moving down this corridor, and everything in the center of the corridor was absolutely in focus. Whereas the life review, everything was in focus. Everything that I did, all the different perceptions, the ripples that it caused, all of that was absolutely crystal clear. But this part of the life review, I call it a life preview. I was going down this corridor, and in the center, everything was in focus. But on the periphery, it was like it was a little out of focus, but it felt like if I wanted to, I could go this way. If I wanted to, I could go that way. And so we started to go down this, and I started to have these experiences in this future life. And I eventually reached a point where the light itself, all these millions upon millions of fragments, all spoke in unison at once. And I perceived this to be God. And it said, "This is not your time." And I said, "No way. I know that body is down there being trashed in the ocean. It's just cold. I have no desire to go back to that. And so I said, no way. I've got a family that I've just found that loves me. I'm feeling love like I've never felt before. And life is hard. Life really is hard. I'm not going back. And so I argued with who I perceived as God. And the light spoke one more time. And this time it said, you must go back. You have a purpose. And in that loving parental tone. And it, it, that word purpose just resonated in my being. And I understood it. It was simple, it was efficient. And with that, I accepted. And with acceptance, I found myself outside my body and I'm observing it now. It's being tumbled and tossed. I'm outside my body, observing my body. And it's still in the breaker zone, being tumbled and tossed. But some of the wreckage from the zodiacs had come close to my body. I don't know that it was ever that far away, but now I know that it was close. And the bow line, the end of the bow line, the bitter end, was tapping my lifeless chest, and I was sitting there just kind of mesmerized by that image and thinking, how is the enormity of me? Because I felt like this expansive being. How is the enormity of me going to get back in that body? And three of my soul family were with me, and they were, you know, right there with me. And so another set of waves hit, and part of that bow line had wrapped itself around my arm and my hand. And and as the wave hit, it pulled my body and it actually dislocated my shoulder and my thumb. I didn't feel anything because I was outside my body. I was watching it, it lifted me up to the surface. And when I got up to the surface, my body got tangled up with the rest of the wreckage of the Zodiac. I think there was like a little bit of air left in one of the pontoons, which was keeping it afloat. And so as the waves were pushing me and pounding me up against it, some of that salt water came up out of my lungs. And that's when my soul family, they gave me a gentle push and I came back into my body and took my first breath of air.
Wow.
Lori, dying's hard, but coming back to life is incredibly hard. Um, I was kind of in shock and I was thinking, "Ah, purpose, purpose." You know, it was like I knew what that purpose was. But it just started, it just evaporated. It was like sand slipping through your fingers. It was like, what was that purpose? Why did I decide to come back here? And, but meanwhile, I'm trying to stay on the surface. And fortunately, the other guys that were with me in that boat had stayed on station. And that was, I mean, to me, they're heroes for just doing that because, this is kind of the normal operation that we all kind of look out for each other and, we realize one of us is missing. We look for him. Where is he? And so one of them actually had held on to a flashlight and so he was sweeping that across the surface and I couldn't speak. They were yelling for me, but I couldn't speak because of the salt water, when it comes out makes your throat really raw. So I squeaked and squawked a little bit. Eventually, they found me. We reunited, but then we still had a mile to swim, and I had a dislocated shoulder and a thumb. But I hung on to the Zodiac. But I realized that I was having a tough time staying on the surface. And it's kind of funny when we come back from these experiences, you feel like you're half here and half there, and you still have some of that expansive awareness that you have on the other side. The you know, it's like you're part of all the souls that ever were and all the souls that ever will be, and that awareness is available to you. And so I knew there was something wrong with my life vest, and I popped it open, and the actual fiber lining of my life vest had become dry rotted from its age, and and it had become super saturated with the salt water, and it was actually what was pulling me down. And so when I let go of the life vest, I was able to stay on the surface, hang on with my good arm, and kind of scissor kick, and we all swam into shore together.
Wow. You tell that story so eloquently. I felt mesmerized while you were talking about what happened. And I've listened to lots and lots of NDEs, but I've never heard anybody describe God in the way that you did as the millions of fragments of light, and then visibly seeing the fragments of light peel off as souls that you recognized. So I want to talk about that a little bit more.
Sure.
So you've got these fragments and these three souls, and you recognize them. They're lights. How did you recognize them? And did you have any inkling of who they were, like our passed away loved ones or souls that maybe you've never even incarnated with, but you knew?
Yeah, well, this was my first experience, and in subsequent, I've had a couple more experiences
Yes, I
where,
know. We want to talk. I want to get to those as well.
okay,
Definitely.
but
Definitely.
they were people, or they are people that are a part of my life, that are on the other side, and so the way I recognized them was, one, there's kind of like a just a level of communication that we don't have here. Okay. But
Telepathic,
also,
right?
yeah, it's telepathic, but it's also kind of like a knowing, because there's
Mhm.
so much information that it's exchanged that we couldn't, it would take us all day just to say welcome, the way that felt welcoming,
Wow.
The-
Okay, that's another thing I've never heard anybody describe before. It would take all day to communicate one little piece because of how it made you feel.
yeah, because of just the enormity of understanding, the
Mm-hmm.
level of understanding, the level of awareness,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
exists on that side. And so, and their eyes, I don't, they were fragments of light, but I could perceive eyes. And that was one of the things that when I came back, that was kind of, it really freaked me out, because I was an engineer, I wasn't used to this thing. This whole experience really freaked me out. But when I came back, when I looked into someone's eyes, I could see their light. And that really, that just, I thought I'd really lost my crackers. And, and so I,
So, can you describe the first time it happened? I'm sure you remember it because it had to have been pretty significant. Can you explain? And then I'd like to really know about that. Does the light look different in different people, or is it all just the same?
no, it is. I mean, because we're unique individuals here, and we carry a percentage of our light with us. I
Mm.
believe, and this is my belief, if it doesn't feel right, throw it away. But I believe that when we come back, we bring a percentage of our light being with us. We carry that with us all the time. And that's our connection to our higher consciousness, our higher self. And so that light that we carry with us is within us. And we can touch it. We can go inward, and we can connect to our higher consciousness. But that light is just as unique as each and every one of us. So yeah, it does appear slightly different. The first time it happened for me was, with my first wife. Um, I got home that night, and I was in shock. I was suffering hypothermia pretty badly, and I had one of the guys, he had popped my shoulder back in, and I had pounded my thumb back in. But, and I didn't go see a doctor because I was in shock. I didn't know any better. But my wife, fortunately, was trained as a nurse. And so she recognized that because the minute she touched me, I was ice cold. And so she, recognized and started to try to bring my body temperature up. And as she's doing that, um, I looked in her eyes and I saw her, and I started to say, I think I died. And and I didn't realize at the time, but she had had a dream. The reason she was awake, because this is the middle of the night, so the reason she was awake was she had a dream that I had died and it scared her. And
Did
so
she
then
did she tell you how you died in her dream?
no, no, no. I found this out much later, but no, she had a dream that I had died, and then suddenly I'm at the door pounding, because I'd lost my keys, I'd lost everything. The only thing I had on was my shorts, and the pockets of that were full of sand, and my eyes and ears were all packed with sand and stuff like that. So she was, and I'm ice cold, so look like a zombie, right? Um, and so she was trying to care for me, and then I tell her that I died. So, but it was the reason I did that was because I saw the light in her, and I thought I was communicating to her on that same level, but we're not. And in this physical life, we haven't recognized that we can communicate like that.
That's really fascinating. I feel like the luckiest person to be able to talk to people like you with these stories because your things that you say confirm things that have happened to me. So I haven't
Oh,
had an NDE, but I have had these 18 very profound out of body experiences through a substance called 5-MeO-DMT, where I've experienced my soul. And I want to say it was maybe the fourth, fifth experience. I was on the other side and I was shown that the part of my higher self, the soul that was in my human incarnation at this point in time, would be the equivalent of my pinky fingernail. And I don't know if that's the same for everybody. I've been kind of shown later on in different experiences that that is different for different people. And depending on where you are, and it's not a good, better, best, it's just a different. We all bring in what we need because our souls are so vast that most people can't understand that our soul could be having five, 10, 100 incarnations at the same time with
yeah.
equal amounts of the pinky fingernail in each one of those because our soul is that powerful. So I would like you to speak to that because it sounds like we're talking about the same thing.
We are actually, yes. I'm right on board with you because I believe, here in life, in this physical incarnation, it's like our life tends to swing between. I believe that in life we suffer from the amnesia of being, separation, that we're separate individuals forging our life, right?
Yep, yep.
Well, also there's a duality. There's a duality between our self, our human self, small s, and our soul, big S, or and so I believe that as we go through life, there are periods of time when we swing more to the human side, and there are
Mm,
other times when we swing more to our spiritual side. So,
makes sense.
and as we swing back and forth, that fragment of light will expand and contract.
So
It
it's
will,
not stagnant. That was probably at that moment in time. That's what was there. But like I would
yeah.
imagine, probably 75 or 80% of my higher self had to be with my kid to 20-year-old self, just because the evolution was way, way lower than now.
Yeah, yeah. And so, as we go through life, we need more of our light and it's there for us to draw on. And there are times when we need to take care of business. And so, we're not so reliant on it. But we've lost that ability to be aware, you know, of that connection and how beneficial it is in our life.
Okay, well, not everybody who's watching is ever going to have an NDE. And I feel that people who tune into this are here to learn from people like you. So, how can we expand that?
Yeah, I think it's really not that hard, and I'm gonna make it sound simple, but of course because of our human consciousness, a lot of times we overthink things, and so we make like to make things more complicated than they really are. It all comes down to a matter of allowing. Now, that's a simple word, makes it sound very simple, but we have to let go. In fact, I'm sure you've heard this with all the near-death experiencers, that the near-death experience started when they allowed it, when they allowed themselves the release of this life. And that's kind of what you have to do to connect with your higher consciousness. You have to allow yourself to let go and to just simply be. And there's ways to do that. Meditation is a tried and true. You talk to any spiritual, belief system. Meditation is a process that we can all do, but it requires discipline at first, right? We have to kind of, we have to, at first, it's very uncomfortable, and we're going to sit there and we're going to, what am I doing? But there's lots of ways to meditate. There's lots of ways for us to connect. Many people feel closest to their higher consciousness when they're in nature.
That's what I
Or,
do. Me for
yep.
sure. Yes.
Now I was an engineer. I felt that connection because as commercial divers, we're very physical. So a lot of physical exercise, a lot of training, stuff like that goes into it. And so when I was running, I could. It was very much like a meditation in a lot
That's
of
for
ways.
me
You've
with
got that.
hiking. I'm the same. I'm the
Yep.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, walking meditation, sitting meditation, listening to music transports us.
Oh,
There's
I
a
think so
lot.
too.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to. Of course, my meditation teacher would probably be slapping me right about now, but
Well,
um,
no,
but
this is really good because
mhm.
I actually developed a series of 63 videos that are on my channel. I'll link it here if people want to check them out. And it was called Uncover Your Soul's Purpose, What You Don't Know Is Holding You Back. No meditation required, because there were a lot of people who awakened to this whole new, you know, opening to their heart, to who they are, and they hear meditate, meditate, meditate. And
Right,
not everybody can. Look, I've been on my spiritual journey for a long time, and it doesn't matter if I had 15 hours of sleep. I guarantee I will probably fall asleep if I try and sit down and meditate. It just never has worked for me. And so I don't want
right,
to turn people off who haven't been able to have a meditation experience. And I don't want people to think they're less than, they're not as good, they'll never achieve what they want to achieve spiritually without it, because it's
right.
not true. So I'm
Yeah.
glad that you actually said that, because meditation's great if you can get there and it works for you, but do not feel like you are left behind if you cannot do that.
Right. And optimal times of the day are another thing to be aware of. Like for me, first thing in the morning, that's when I'm the quietest. That's when my
Hmm.
being is the quietest. Maybe some people at the end of their day is the time when maybe that's when it's quietest. So look for that as well. The
That's
other thing
helpful.
is when we one way to recognize that higher consciousness is speaking to us, because it really does speak to us all the time. It's just we don't allow ourselves the awareness, is anytime that you feel inspiration. When you feel inspiration, you feel inspired about something, or you have a craft or an activity that brings you inspiration. Where do you think inspiration comes from? It comes from our higher consciousness. And when we get inspiration, many times it's accompanied by a feeling, an actual physical sensation. Some people feel it in their heart, some people in the top of their head, their crown. I know many healers, because I do a lot of healing work, and a
Mhm.
lot of healers feel it in their hands. So be aware of when you're feeling that inspiration. Where does it manifest? Where does it manifest in your body? Because that's a key. That's a key to your doorway into transporting you beyond yourself into your higher consciousness and your connection with the light.
That's great. Well, let's go back to the light since you brought it up again. When you were describing all those fractals of light, you know what it reminded me of like a school of fish moving all together in unison.
That's the way I relate it to people that way a lot, because you see them, like you'll see the light reflecting through the water on these fish, like a school of sardines, a school, and when they start to move, they'll all move in one direction or another, or they'll split up into like two groups and then re-merge together. It's absolutely beautiful, and that's the way the light kind of appeared to me, only infinite, Lori, like infinite. So it was a
Wow.
giant school.
Wow. Well, let's talk a little bit about this soul family and soul connection. This is something that I've actually talked a lot about on my channel. And I have been, it's been, I guess, portrayed or understood that when we go on the other side, we have this soul group. that is this group of, like, it's a small group, like 10, 15, 12 souls that are our closest souls in all of our incarnations, in all of our existence. And I don't necessarily believe that they are family members or people that we know on this in this earthly plane. And you've had an experience where you were raised by a single mother who then was taking you in these families and you weren't fitting in. So I'm imagining with your explanation that you probably don't have this giant family where you had aunts and uncles and all these people, where a lot of people that are listening have had those experiences. And I think a lot of people would extrapolate and think, oh, my closest soulmate's going to be my mom and my daughter and my best friend. But I don't really feel it's been that way. I think I've recognized three, maybe four of those
Hmm.
souls here on this earth, and they weren't people that I would have expected to recognize. So, will you talk to that a little bit? I'd love to hear your interpretation of what you felt since you actually experienced like 12 of them on the other side.
Yeah. And I've only met two in person and one person that as he died. So the two people that I met, one actually was one of my guardians. I didn't recognize him in my first near-death experience because he was still alive, and so he was standing back. It was really weird. Um, he wasn't one of the original three that greeted me. Um, but and the other person was actually a coworker, and she it was I knew right away, and this is after my near-death experience, and before my second experience, I knew this coworker, there was a connection there. We had a connection. I couldn't quite understand it. Nowadays you hear people talk about twin souls and things like that. Um, it wasn't a it was purely platonic. We were just
Yeah,
coworkers,
yeah.
but we understood each other, on a level that, was just different. And so but the rest of my family, and now I have an extended family because of my second marriage. I have a
That's
huge family.
wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. And we could talk about that for a while because I found actually birth family that I didn't know that I had because I thought I was a single child of a single mom, but turns out I have brothers and sisters out there I didn't even know about.
Wow.
So, but that thanks to DNA testing, right?
Yeah.
Um, but um, but none of them, I've met a few of them, but none of them were part of that soul family. So yes, I would say like you, not all of us. Now I know of some experiencers that, they met many of their family, some of their pets, that I've talked to. I talked to a lot of experiencers as well. I've been very involved with some NDE groups.
I actually do seriously believe that my dog that I have right now, she's 14 and a half, just because of this connection that we have, it's just indescribable. I do think that she is a very advanced soul. I don't think that she is the pet that I see her to be, but I do
Mm.
think that she is part of my soul family and came in at a very specific time in my life to get me to a certain place. And when I get there, it's not very much further down the road she's going to exit. But I do think that our pets are much more evolved than what we think they are.
Oh yeah, I mean they guide us in a lot of ways as
Yeah,
well, right?
yeah.
I believe that everything is connected to the light through love. I mean that's part of my philosophy, and so how could it not be? You know,
Right,
how
right.
could it?
Oh, I love that. Okay, so let's talk about your life review, because life reviews, I believe, have the biggest ability to really impact people that are watching, because when you understand how it really works, not this whole judgment, brimstone, fire, what you did, how you relive it through other people, I think it really impacts the way that people think and the way that they move forward with what they're doing. So, in your life review, you said you walked through that bubble and you're in that room and is it just the three, or were there more of your soul family in there?
The whole soul family and
The
myself.
whole soul family, so all of them. Okay. And how did it present to you? Because I've talked to lots of people. Was it a screen? Was it on that bubble? Like, were we in the sphere in Las Vegas where you could see it all 360 degrees? How did it appear to you?
It appeared as if I had we'd all, you know, all of us as it's kind of hard to explain, but it was like we were transported back to my life and we were really reliving the entire life. We were experiencing it almost in a physical way. Smells, tastes, um,
Smells too.
yeah.
Interesting.
So, but it moved very rapidly. But there were, and every interaction is what was significant. Every interaction with other people, those connections. We don't realize how we affect each other. How much we affect each other. So every interaction I could see and I got to perceive from their eyes. And, you know, so it wasn't so much like a screen or it wasn't like a big amphitheater or anything like that. It was more like reliving it, but reliving it through multiple lenses all at the same time. So it's kind of like, okay, you and I are interacting, but then suddenly I'm you and you're me and we're interacting. And my soul family is experiencing it the exact same way I am. So that's what made it incredibly humbling for me because I was fully aware that they were experiencing it the same way that I was. And so when I did something out of pure loving intention, I got to see that. I got to see that and I got to feel that from the people that I was interacting with. Um, and when I did something from just my own selfish egoic self, I got to experience that. I got to see that. I got to feel that. So the emotions, everything, the emotions, the feelings. And but the ones that made the biggest impact on me, the ones that I saw the most ripples were when I would do something with loving intention, but would put some passion behind it. Like I really, really wanted to be loving
Can
with
you share an
intention.
example of one of those? If it's not too personal.
Yeah, this one's in my book actually. I I used to when I was a young man, I I my I had to work while I was in high school. And so this is when we were living out in Arizona and I had to work behind this meat counter. Well, actually, this happened later in life. This is when but anyway, I'm working in at Fairway Foods in the behind the meat counter. And I had learned, the meat cutter had shown me how to, do stuff. And I'm working the counter. But every week we used to have this little old lady used to come into the store and everybody, Manny, who worked in the back, used to run into the back warehouse when he saw this woman come because she was just Mrs. Grumpy. And so she would come in and everybody was just nobody wanted to deal with this lady because she was just so mean and grumpy. So she would come up to the meat counter every week and get her, her order of meat. And so I don't know. I just something in me made me feel like I really want to see this woman smile. And so I would go out of my way to do yeah, and made no difference whatsoever. But one time she came in, she wanted a rump roast. And so I had one in the back that I just tied. And so I brought it out and I said, and I explained, how special this roast was. And she was having some company coming over or something. So she took it, wrapped it up, gave it to her. This is one of those old-fashioned butcher, where you wrap the meat up in the white paper and everything and send it to her. Send it on her way. The following week, she came back and she didn't go do her shopping. She went right back to the meat counter. And I thought, oh shit, I'm in trouble. And and she she came up to the counter. She's like looking up over the counter at me, and she says, and she starts to tell me how she had this dinner party and she had made the roast and how wonderful it was. And then a smile came, and it was like this light just lit up her face. It was just absolutely amazing. And I could see the party. I could see her entertaining. I could see the entire event um, through her eyes, through the experience of giving her the package. I could see her taking it home. I could see her preparing it and her guests coming and the whole shebang. So it was that moment was a tiny little. I hadn't thought about that, and I never thought about that after it happened.
Right.
It was just one of those tiny little moments in our life, and but it had this huge significance of showing something where you did something with loving intention and a little bit of passion of how you really, really wanted to see this woman smile. That was all it
I
took.
love, oh my gosh, I love that story so much because I do feel like so many people who have a life review talk about this. They're not shown some big event where they won an award at work, they got a promotion, they were the fastest runner and broke a record. They're always shown these seemingly insignificant moments that they never even really realized and had no idea. But I think the most important thing that you said is intention. And I think intention counts so much from everything I've read, everything I've listened to, and it's just another confirmation. So you shared something very positive, and I really appreciate that. Do you have anything that really stuck out that you would be willing to share that was on the not so positive side? Remembering that this is 20-year-old Dave and not 40 years
Yeah, yeah,
later Dave
yeah,
that
because
is so
you got to
evolved.
realize, yeah, that I had my experience in my mid 20s. So I was a very prejudiced person, and I had an experience in a bar where a guy came up and propositioned me. He was he was gay, and he propositioned me, and I wasn't aware in those days. And so I just punched his lights out basically. Um, and the guys that were in the bar, because I was yelling at him about what he had just how he had just propositioned me, and they heard it, and I could feel their angst against this guy. I could feel the barman when he's calling the cops. I could feel his, like frustration that, oh, here's another fight in my bar. And I could feel when the cops came and pulled me aside. And this is out west where that attitude back in those days, remember, this is, back in the early 80s, maybe, no, even earlier than that. It was probably in the 70s, mid 70s. And so later 70s, they, there wasn't a lot of tolerance. And so I got to feel that. And I think that, and it felt like that was actually contributing to my anger because that mob mentality was when I started yelling that this guy had just, come on to me and how, you know, anyway,
So
that,
did you
that,
experience it from his point of view then too?
yes, yes. So I got to
What
feel
was
all
his?
that angst. I got to feel that mob mentality in the life review, but I also got to see how this embarrassment of how he had misjudged me and how, um, and the fact that they took us both outside, the police did, and they really, really gave him the third degree, and they pretty much let me go, um, even though I initiated the whole thing. Um, and I got to feel his frustration, his embarrassment, um, and it really, really, it hurt me. And I mean, that experience really hurt me. And I don't talk about it too much. So this is probably
Well,
one of the
I
first
super
reviews that,
appreciate I really appreciate I almost feel like I want to cry because I know things were so different back then. And just like having to feel somebody else's
yeah,
pain must
yeah,
be from that side because it'd be so pure. it wouldn't just be imagining somebody else's pain, but feeling it as if it were your own must be so different. Thank you for sharing that because I know how impactful these stories are for people that are watching.
Yeah, since um, I have a lot of friends that are part of the LGBTQ community, and I support them 100% and their life. I've learned because of this life review and seeing how everybody, one of the things that I got out of this was kind of acceptance of myself. Yeah, I was a guy that needed help. I needed to work on myself, but I could accept that that was who I was and that was where I was. But
Mhm.
also tolerance. I didn't have that before this experience. So I suddenly learned that, there are a lot of people that cross our paths every day, and they make choices for their life based on their life. And we may not agree with their life choices, but they're their life choices. And I can be tolerant that I don't know all of their life circumstances that brought them to this point that we're crossing paths, but I can be tolerant that that is who they are and those are their life choices. You
All
know,
right, can we talk a little bit about your future events? Because it's not very common that somebody gets to see things from their future. So I would imagine if this is the 1983 and you're seeing these future things as this corridor, that there have to be things that you can't even reconcile. You don't know what they are.
yeah.
Did you then, as you're living your life, start to have this sense of deja vu when certain things would come up that you saw?
It's kind of funny because I had a second experience 11 years later that where I was meditating and I was told to go back into the light by the light. The light came into my meditation and told me to return. And when I heard that, I just was immediately swept back into my near-death experience, relived that. And in the life review, I got to see the 11 years of difference between the first experience and the second experience. And in that, and I didn't think I'd change that much, but because I'd adopted that, acceptance of myself, tolerance of others. Also, I had a new reality as far as truth. And so, because that's another thing that many experiencers feel that you need to be true to your being, who you are. And so,
Like standing in your truth, not telling truthful things, but standing in your truth,
yes,
right?
and
Yeah.
recognizing that sometimes your truth may go against norms because it
Mm,
resonates with your being. Your
mhm,
truth resonates within your being, and when you cross something that is a part of your truth, it resonates, and so you can recognize it that much more when you
mhm.
you know live that level of awareness. But so I got to see. I didn't think I'd change that much, but in that second life review, I got to see how much I had really changed. Now, the things and then I realized what I didn't hadn't really done that I really should have done after the first experience was to start um, to be open about this whole thing, and to find other experiencers because it kind of retarded my integration of the experience by not being, but because I didn't share the experience. I kind of like I wanted to go back to my old life. Many experiencers feel that. They want, gosh, I just want my old life back. I don't like seeing light in people's eyes. I don't like seeing auras. I don't like, this is not who I was or who I am or who I thought I was. Um, I want my old life back, And so you try to tamp it down, but you can't because these experiences live with you on a daily basis. They become your new guiding rule, of how you perceive life. They've blown your worldview out of the water, and excuse the pun, but and you now have this new reality, and it actually reinforces the duality that I was talking about, where you recognize you have a spiritual side and you have a human side, and now the one thing that almost all experiencers desire more than anything is to bring those two together. to be able to live in unity with your spiritual side and your human side. And so that becomes kind of the battle. But I didn't realize that 11 years I had tried to tamp it down. And so I felt like I had really, um, not addressed it right away. But after the second experience, I came to that full realization after seeing how much I really had changed, how I had become more spiritual in my life, and how I had tried to introduce that into my day to day, not just on the weekends at church, every day, all the time, try to bring that into life. So, you know, but then I had another experience, my third experience. So,
Okay,
the th
I want to put a pin and come back to the third experience because I have a question for you. You said that the voice of all of those souls in unison as God said that you had to go back, and you're like, nope, just like everybody, nope. And then you're like, but you have to go back because you have a purpose, and that word resonated through you. It's been 41 years since this happened, and you've had the second and a third. Do you now understand what your purpose is?
yeah, purpose is multidimensional.
Okay.
And that's one of the problems that we have. We don't think multidimensionally, but we have a lot of purposes in life. We have little day-to-day purposes, like when you suddenly read something or you have just come across some new information that, oh, it seems very meaningful to me. And then all of a sudden someone else comes up and they're asking the same question that you just received all that information about. And so now you're able to share it with this other person. That's a purpose.
I love
Um,
that.
but
That's a
also,
synchronicity too.
and
That's
it and right,
really cool.
exactly. And that's
Yeah.
that flow in life that we want to live within this
Yes.
flow, right, of synchronicity and living with synchronicity and having it a part of our daily day-to-day life. Well, also, there are shared purposes. Shared purposes like humanity has an opportunity right now to become aware become aware of our spiritual self. That's a shared purpose that we all have, that we all share. So you
And
have,
you're a part of that by helping people to understand through your experience that that's who they really are.
yeah, I try to do that on my podcast as much as possible. That's kind of kind of my giving back because I
Okay.
really do believe that, you know, it's funny because when I lived out in Arizona, I became very close with some of my friends' grandmothers, saw the dysfunction in my life and tried to help me out. And so they bestowed a little of their philosophy on me. And actually, I had my first vision quest when I was 14 out there. And they these grandmothers showed me, and this is something that I've adopted, in the life review, it became one of those prominent moments where they were showing me how life is like a hoop. It's like a giant hoop, because everything in a hoop looks outward in 360 degrees, but it also looks inward at 360 degrees. And so our human life is a hoop. Our family is another hoop. Our community is a greater hoop. And our world is another hoop. Okay. So all of these hoops, we all interact with each other, looking outward and inward all at the same time and in 360 degrees. So this is kind of the way I perceive life, that I am this individual, but I am a part of a greater community. And so I try to bring that into everything that I do. And I totally lost track of your question. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I think you really answered. I think you've answered all of it.
Okay.
You want to share the third near-death experience that you had?
Yeah, the third one, well, and this kind of goes to that purpose,
And when did this happen, this third one?
2000,
Okay.
December 2000. I was by this time I had transitioned. I was one of those uh, I didn't feel like I was being of service. This is a call that a lot of experiencers feel that, you need to give back, you need to be of service. And so I had quit my life at sea, being the chief engineer of the research vessel, my dream job, right? I gave it up And I started working in healthcare. And I ended up becoming the manager of dialysis programs for a hospital in central New York. We had 5 clinics, and I started managing this dialysis program. And one day I'm in my office, and all of a sudden I feel like my back absolutely exploded. I felt like I was having this red. I was like looking through a red haze of pain, and I went to. I was assistant director at the time, and I went to my director. I was supposed to have a meeting with, and I said, I can't make the meeting. I've got to go up to the emergency room because I'm in a lot of pain. And I actually walked up to the ED, which was a couple blocks away. And I'm sorry, spirits kind of chatter in my ear. Um, and so I get up there and I present myself to the emergency department. And they immediately, when they think that I'm having a cardiac arrest because I've got radiating pain, spine, arms. Um, and so they put me on a 12 lead EKG. And meanwhile, I'm like praying, could I just have some pain medicine? But I know that I know the procedures. They have to rule out everything first before they can give me any pain medicine. And and so they put me through, heart monitoring, finally some X-rays, and then I'm sitting in the room, and the nurse that was taking care of me actually was one of my secretaries when she was going through nursing school. And now she's working in the ED, and she's taking care of me. And all of a sudden she comes through the door. And this is one of those moments that I saw in the life review, in the original life review. She comes through the door. It's like deja vu on steroids. I know exactly what she's going to do. I know exactly what she's going to say. And she comes in and there's tears in her eyes. And she goes, Dave, the resident's going to be here in a minute. And then he comes in and he's kind of hemming and hawing. And I'm sitting there. Now remember, I'm in pain. They still haven't given me any pain medicine. And, but I recognize this moment. This moment is so crystal clear. And I know exactly because I'm reliving it through the eyes of my NDE. And and he finally comes out and says, well, we found a mass, we found this mass in your lungs, and it's metastasized into your spine. And your spine has lost 2.5 bones of its thoracic, and the tumor can't support its weight any longer, and your spine has collapsed. And and you have basically, they never said, but they, later on, it was stage 4 lung and bone cancer that had metastasized into my lungs, and it ate away 2.5 bones of my thoracic, and my spine collapsed. And it was in my body. They found lesions in my hip, my brain, my kidneys.
They're like,
And
you're a goner. That's what
yeah,
everybody
yeah.
had to have
And,
been thinking,
and
right?
yeah, one doctor actually said, well, they were very, very kind and compassionate because they have clinical pathways that they see how these things progress, and so they understand the clinical pathway, and so they were being very compassionate, and they said, you, one doctor, because I had seen this in my life review, and I had seen I was going to have cancer, and I saw that I was also going to live beyond the cancer, so they thought I was in denial but I had
Of course
immediately
they
gone
did.
to
Yeah.
acceptance. They thought I was, the stages of grief, right? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. They thought I was in denial. Meanwhile, I had just catapulted into acceptance. Okay, I've seen this. I know what this is. And, and I told them that we were going to treat it. And so fortunately, I was, a manager in this hospital system, so I knew many of the doctors. And so my medical director, I talked to him, and he kind of gave me some, who I should talk to. And I went to a couple doctors, and one of them said, "Look, Dave, I've looked over your chart. You only have maybe 8 weeks. Um, just take some pain medicine, get your affairs in order, and and sit back, and I was like, you're fired, never mind. um that's not the way it's going to go. And so I, I picked my care team and I treated it, but I didn't just treat it through the medical system. I treated it holistically at the same time. So I used my spirit communication to basically overcome it. And I was able to overcome the cancer within 6 months. I was cancer free within 6 months. And I had stage 4, lung and bone cancer. My oncologist just said, Dave, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever it is, just keep doing it. Yep.
Well, this is crazy. So the amount of deja vu that you must have had throughout that whole thing had to have been staggering. Well,
So
I want to talk about two more things with you before I let you go. So the first one I want to ask you about is you mentioned that you have this whole cancer experience, and then you figure out how to listen to your intuition and do these other remedies that wind
yep.
up being helpful. Was all of that part of your journey to becoming a healer?
Yep.
Will you
Yep.
explain that a little bit? Because
Yep.
I'm just
Yep.
putting all the pieces together here.
Yeah. Yeah. That you're very perspective. You're very perceptive there, Laurie. It was and it was part of my purpose. In hindsight, I can see that it was part of my purpose because my total life changed. My life has done a bunch of 180s. It's like my whole life. It's like I'm this person, and then I'm 180. I'm this person, and then so post cancer. Well, first I had to live with it because they didn't believe that it was gone. I had to live with it with a broken spine for over a year. I was trussed up like a turkey. Um, but eventually I was able to get past it. But I had some very spiritually transformative experiences along the way that,
Okay, if you're willing to talk about them, I want to hear about them.
all right, well, I'll try to keep them brief. One was I had kind of an angel experience where while I'm in the oncology ward, I'm in the bed, and this is during the initial diagnosis and prognosis that they were trying to work up where all the cancer was. I had now remember I'm part of this hospital. I'm part of the management team, and each division had this is a Catholic hospital, so each division had a nun attached to it, a Franciscan nun, and so I knew a lot of the nuns, but I didn't know the oncology nun. And she came in and she sat on the bed and we were talking and while we were talking, we worked out it was like I was gifted this understanding of how to deal with the pain and it's a whole process. I won't go into it because it's quite lengthy. But anyway, she kind of conveyed this way of dealing with the pain that dealt with going into my higher consciousness and working with the pain. And then she left. And so I rang the nurses because I had forgotten to get her name. So I rang the nurses and they had moved me because I was a manager in the hospital. Everybody knew me on all 3 shifts. So people were coming into my room to see how I was day and night. So they had to get a control. The nurses had to get a control on that. So they had moved me to the room right next to the nurses station. And so when I rang the nurse, Dave, what's going on? And I said, who's the nurse on the ward today? Because I want to know who the nun is. And they go, nun. I says, well, your oncology nun. Who's your oncology nun? And they go, she's not here today. And I said, well, then who was the nun that just came in my room? She goes, no one has been in your room, Dave. And so, so, of course they thought I was, well, too much drug, too much morphine, Dave, let's back off of the morphine a little bit. But to me, it felt like, because actually she had taught me how to dose down off of the morphine and the Percocet and all of that. So
It was an
that was,
angel, wasn't it?
yeah, yeah. And it was, to me, it was an angel, an angel occurrence that I just had. But what she taught me how to get off of the pain medication. And so, but I still had a collapsed spine. I still had a lot of pain, but I learned how to deal with it through mindfulness. Well, in that state of mindfulness, I started to develop my visualizations and my ability to go back into the light to connect, because I'd had other experiences leading prior to this, to the cancer, where I had learned. I had another experiencer who was a mentor, Margaret Keene, who had taught me how to go back into the light and connect with the light. And so I started using that connection with the light to be able to go in, visualize, and heal myself at the same time that I'm doing the medical therapies. And so that was all this huge progression that once I became cancer free, once I had gone through the surgeries to restabilize my spine and things like that, and I learned how to get out of the wheelchair and out of the walker and all that, and I'm walking like a normal person now without the cane or anything anymore. People were like, Dave, that's quite a journey, and you did a lot of energy healing work on yourself. Yeah, so do you do that for anybody else? And I thought,
That's what I was going to ask
I
next.
was like, yeah, I could do that. And so I started doing energy work. And so I call it white light energy work, because what I do is I talk to somebody. I find out, because I found that energy work is multifaceted as well, just like everything in life that we don't recognize. But so it works on, you have to work on energy with mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual all at the same time. And so I talk to a person for just a couple minutes, 10, 15 minutes, and they, make sure we get them into the present moment. It's also, energy work is done in the present moment. So we get into the present moment, and then I go into the light. I connect with their light essence, because as we're talking, I'm making that connection. And so I connect with their fragment of light, right? That is
Right
in
through the
their,
eyes, because you have that ability too.
and it's so it's the fragment that they carry, but also the greater fragment, because I'm going into the light. I'm connecting to their great light source, and so it directs the energy work.
So, is this something that you have to do in person with somebody? Or are you able
No,
to do this just like
no, in
we're
fact,
having a conversation like this?
yeah. So since COVID, I stopped even doing the in person,
Mm,
and I do everything 100% right now. Distance. I do it all distance now. So if someone's in the States, we do it over the phone. If they're international, I have a number of clients. So I have about half and half, are international and half in the States. And and I do that over Zoom.
Tell me the way that people connect with you for that. Is that a website that they go to?
Yeah, they go to my website, which is Dharma Talks, Dharma Talks, Talks, dharmatalks.com.
Okay.
And and when you go on to dharmatalks.com, there's I've got pages that talk about my NDE, pages that talk about my cancer journey, pages that, because I'm also a woodworker, because remember, inspiration, I that's where I get
Yeah.
that's where I play with my inspiration nowadays, a little bit of woodworking, stuff like that.
Nice.
And so my Dharma Talks has a little bit of everything, but there's also there's a page about energy work and healing. And so when you click that tab, you'll see the links to the scheduling program and stuff like that.
Now, it sounds like you have a little bit of a special kind of a leg up on everybody else because somebody who had this experience showed you how to go into the light. So you know what that
Uh,
is when it's going into the light. So if somebody hadn't had that experience of going into the light, is it teachable to learn how to do this pain control yourself?
yes and
Do you
no.
teach it anywhere?
No.
Okay.
It's a
Interesting. Well,
when I
maybe.
do, I have taught it,
Okay.
but it's one-on-one, and only when spirit tells me the person is ready.
Okay.
And then
Interesting. Well,
I don't
just
have any
opening
control
that up
over
there
that.
for you.
I don't have any control over that, and I haven't done it in a long time. But I've had a number of requests of people, ask me, could you teach me how to go into the light, that sort of thing.
Yes.
It helps if you're an experiencer and you've already experienced the light, because then it's just a
Mhm.
matter of let's find the door. Where's your doorway? Let's find it. And so we
Yeah.
explore it.
Well, that's amazing. When you were talking about your whole healing journey and the cancer and all that collapsed spine and having to sit in the hospital and wait for a year and have all of that, it's interesting because I'm sure that there are a lot of people that are watching that have experienced things in their life that weren't very pleasurable, things that really caused pain, caused a loss of maybe income, all kinds of things. And sometimes people wonder, like, why me? Why did this happen to me? And I love that you shared this part of your story because there is a purpose. There's usually a bigger purpose that we're maybe not consciously aware of because we do put that veil of forgetfulness on to forget that we've come here to do these certain things. And so I do know a lot of people who have had experiences that most people would look at and say, boy, that's pretty negative. I wouldn't have wanted to have that. But then they wind up taking that experience, and only because they had that are they able to extrapolate that into something bigger beyond themselves that probably is part of their purpose. So I'm so grateful that you shared that.
Yeah, I mean, Lori, when do we reach out for the divine? It's usually when we're at our lowest, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and
Yeah,
and
that's
and
a good point.
and that's when we tend to be a little more open too, because we're already beseeching the divine, you know.
Yes. Yes.
So that's when we open ourselves up to ask. Remember allowing. Remember I mentioned that earlier.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
allowing. It's a critical part of
Right.
of and a positive intention. I don't know how, I know on my podcast, I've talked about this to nauseum to myself anyway, about how the way we walk through life is the way that the universe is going to contribute and to, assist us. And so if we walk through life with loving intention and positive out things, the universe will conspire to help us with that. We walk through life with frustration and anger and angst. The universe will collaborate with us and help us with that.
Yep.
So it's really important that we get control, self mastery, that we work on self mastery.
I'm so glad you said that. I've done so many videos in the last few weeks. I'm going to link one up that really talks about that concept about asking because we have free will and spirit doesn't really want to connect with us because they do not have the ability to override our free will. We have to ask and invite that in. And I'm
Yeah.
glad that you mentioned that again. I could probably talk to you for several more hours.
Yeah, we're going a
We will
little
be
long
tired of
here.
talking by the time I would be done with you. Like seriously, like I am so grateful that I get to be the one that has these conversations and ask every question that I've ever wanted to ask somebody like you who comes on the show. Thank you for being so open and for sharing, but I want people to be able to connect with you also. So you've already shared your website, but
Yeah.
where can people find your books? Can you tell us a little bit about your books and anything else that you have that you want them to connect with?
Yeah, Voyage of Purpose. That's the one that talks about my near-death experience. And anyway, the one on the other side is A Voice as Old as Time. That talks about contemplation because my podcast on YouTube is, and I'll give you the links and you can
Yeah,
put
I'll
it
put
in the
everything down in the
comments.
show
Yeah,
notes.
yeah. But contemplation is what I talk about in my podcast. It's called contemplative living. So if we can bring more contemplation into our day-to-day lives, it tends to help us on our journey.
Dave, what a beautiful, amazing, powerful soul you are. Thank you so much for sharing your ripple effect on this world and for everything you're doing to bring these topics to light and share your experiences. I so appreciate you.
Lori, thank you for having me. I love this type of interview where we get to talk about the juice in life because it's all about squeezing the juice out of life. Let's live that empowered juice-filled life, where we get to really live life. And this type of interview really does that for me.
Oh, yay. And thank you, everybody, so much for watching. Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.